With Chainsaw Chapter 200, we transition away from the Death Devil putting her plan into action, and instead we look into Denji as he's having his date with Mitaka, and this becomes a moment where I officially give up on any hope that I had left that there will be a somewhat happy ending for Denji and Mitaka, because whenever you start having a character go through this much self-reflection like we have from Mitaka at this point in the story, particularly with her having a misunderstood maniac like Yoru sharing her body, I don't think that this is going to end very well. However, let's back things up and let's get into the meat and potatoes of the chapter itself. So we open up the chapter with Mitaka pointing at the sun and saying bang, but she's obviously not shooting out the sun, but instead we see Mitaka telling Denji that she hates the sunset because she hates burns, sunburns in particular, which is just as what you expect from Mitaka. It is dark, it is morbid, but now that you've had a chance to get used to a character, it has a charm to it that makes the dark humor work very well. However, this is one of those moments where the setting, it is a very important thing to take a really important notice of. Denji and Mitaka, they're looking out at a damaged city as two damaged people. Two people that are damaged but trying to heal, just as the city will eventually try to heal. But the one who hates the sunset is shooting at the sun that is in the process of setting. Sunsets in literature can be used both as a romantic atmosphere, that's the cheesy equivalent of it. This chapter does use the sunset in the most Chainsaw Man way ever for the romantic aspect, but they can also be used for foreshadowing for a character's arc reaching the final stages before it's being closed. As someone who is an open movie buff like Fujimoto is, this was not done by mistake, and it just makes you look at Denji and Mitaka standing there together, how they're vibing, and realize you might need to start getting the tissues ready in a few dozen chapters. The somber tone for Mitaka, her character getting those red flags, it continues when Denji starts giving her food and just casually says that he bought the food using the money that he found in a wallet of a dead guy, which Mitaka rightfully calls messed up. But at the same time, you get why Denji didn't hesitate to just use the money. It's not the socially acceptable thing to do. But here you see the differences in how Mitaka and Denji were being brought up. Mitaka had her parents for a time. She knows what is socially acceptable and what isn't, whereas Denji's upbringing, that was the harder one. He was working for the Yakuza, and he was having to find different ways to survive any way that he could, including eating toilet paper if it came down to it, because he didn't know where his next meal would come from or if the next meal would be his last meal. Yet, with this one interaction, we see the transition to Mitaka's self-reflection occurring in real time, because she tells Denji after she complains about the toxic additives that are going to be in the food that she can eat the food because she's a toxic woman now, and she has a sad but distant look on her face as she says it. And it's that one moment that should make you stop and pause, and not necessarily because she's complaining about toxic additives in food, which if she ever comes here to America, we got all that shit in our food. However, think about how much Mitaka has changed since when we first met her. Some of the changes are obviously for the better. She's definitely a better character when we first met her, but others have seen her compromise her morals, and that's to be expected given who she's sharing a body with, Yoru of the Horsewomen, in particular the Horsewoman of War itself. It's only a small thing, something that you'd just be tempted to look over, but this one scene is powerful for the reasons I just laid out, and so as to prove this, Fujimoto takes it a step further by having Mitaka state that she didn't realize that she only needed to do fun things from now on until just now, instead of doing what she had done in the past, which is focus on the bad things like she used to. And she said that she was someone who was almost always focused on the bad because of how angry she always was, which, given everything we know about her that she's been through, that's the normal reaction. This moment where she realizes that people who have been the score of her ire, they weren't necessarily any different than her, so much as they were just trying to not think about what it was that they were struggling with, which leads to Yoru then taking over control of Mitaka's body once again after Mitaka eats the last bit of her food, as the sun continues to set, which that is very striking imagery. This is potentially a last meal with the sunset, and the romantic sunset being the prelude to the chaos that is about to come now that Yoru has taken over. This leads to Yoru taking Denji out onto the streets where the two of them, they're riding on the bike together, they're burning off calories with Denji pedaling and Yoru using the power to shoot at the various people, running after them who have those Chainsaw Man-like appearances. Heads are flying, body parts are being blown off, a head even lands in the basket, and we see the duo of Denji and Yoru just enjoying the beautiful madness as it's being released. Yet, what starts out as a crazy concept of a date, it takes a drastic turn. Fake Chainsaw Man appears, and after Yoru shoots off one of the attacks, the duo is sent flying off of their bikes. And fake Chainsaw Man's asking Denji, why are you on a bike flirting with a girl when the hero of hell shouldn't be doing such a thing? Which obviously our boy Denji, he doesn't agree with that at all. Denji immediately transforms and just starts going after fake Chainsaw Man, but it's after Denji lands one of his attacks that fake Chainsaw Man gives an ominous warning, stating that Denji, he doesn't know what he did. Now, obviously, fake Chainsaw Man is attacking Denji due to what we know are the orders from the Death Devil in the last chapter to shake things up. But what is interesting here is that Yoru doesn't jump in right away for the fight, which that probably changes in the next chapter, but it is something to keep your eyes on moving forward. Also, it's a bit cruel that Denji and Yoru are the ones who are going out on that bike ride date, because if you go back to earlier in Chainsaw Man Part 2, it was Denji telling Mitaka that for their second date, they'll have more of a good time because he's more experienced. Yet, it's Yoru who gets to reap the benefits of that moment, which is completely ironic and cruel in a way if you are eventually heading towards some point in the story where Mitaka dies. Yet, in her own weird way, Yoru better reflects the chaos that we've come to expect when Denji himself is being Chainsaw Man. Another thing that this chapter did very well is that it really tackles the issue of trauma and just dealing with trauma and growing from trauma in a realistic way. The expression that is as old as man itself, that you can't judge a book by its cover, it definitely comes to mind here. Denji, following the events of Chainsaw Man Part 1, he became more sex-starved and he wasn't dealing with this trauma. And Mitaka, following the tragedy that she went through earlier in her life before we meet her in Chainsaw Man Chapter 1 of Part 2, it was somebody that when we meet her, she had more of an angrier perspective. But both of them were healing in their own ways, yet Mitaka appears to finally be trying to move forward with their own form of healing, which in a way it is largely due to Denji because of that process starting back during the Falling Devil arc. Their path to handling trauma and grief, it is a realistic one. As human beings, we are flawed. We're not going to immediately turn the corner when we go through something screwed up, because for us, it's just one of those things where there's not really a handbook to deal with grief. What works for one of us doesn't really work for the other. Some people, when they go through something, they turn to religion. Other people turn to vices. Like for me, when I lost my grandmom a few years ago, I went through a period where I would eat the sweets because my grandmom was the first person to ever give me candy. I was like 5 years old before I ever had candy. I would eat the sweets that she used to give me when I was a 5-year-old. And I then transitioned over to just working myself to the bone in order to move past it. That's how I dealt with the grief. Just as Mitaka said that there are those who are out there who just go about living their life, it's because that's how they're dealing with grief itself. Because one thing about being in mourning, about dealing with grief and trauma, is that you can take as long as you want to deal with it, but the world does not stop. You can either choose to wallow in your own self-pity, or you can choose to move forward and engage in life and heal naturally over time. Denji, he does a similar thing. We saw this with how he was handling everything in the Aging Devil arc, where he outright states that he's going to find a way to find his family again, whatever that next family might be. And now Mitaka is starting to go under her own growth. But how that ends for her, we'll obviously have to wait and see, because Chainsaw Man is going to be on break for the next couple of weeks. But you won't have to wait that long for more content from Anime Explained. I got a really long video on Cell getting ready to drop that should change how you view the character itself from Dragon Ball. That'll be dropping soon, as well as some Fire Force content. So there's going to be quite a few videos that you guys should be seeing, at least a couple. But in the meantime, consider watching these other videos from Anime Explained and consider subscribing, obviously if you haven't already.